The alarm that woke Kesavire was the polite one. The soft triple chime, the thin margin, reserved for problems that had already happened and could not be made worse by shouting. She was out of her bunk before the third note, second eyelid still gummed with sleep, and she read the navigation plot upside down through the open hatch of the crew ring, because that was faster than walking around it. The demarcation was behind them, not near them, not ahead of them, glowing its quiet legal amber at the edge of the plot the way it had glowed every night of her working life. Behind them. The boundary of forbidden human space sat aft of the thin margin's engine bells like a door heard clicking. Shut in another room, and the ship was drifting deeper on a slow, cold vector with all the engines asleep. Kessa hung in the hatchway for one full breath. 26 years old, captain for 4 of them, in debt for all 4, and in that single breath she understood that every one of those problems had just become the smallest thing in her life. "Lo," she said, pushing into the cockpit. "Tell me the plot's drunk." Lo Sen was already strapped in the navigator's couch, both pairs of hands on the console, the read-then-open voice gone flat the way it only went when she was rationing her own panic. "The plot is sober. I have run it 4 times. We crossed at 0340 ship's night while the watch alarm was suppressed. Suppressed by who? By the anchor protocol. We were moored. Moored ships don't drift." Lo's near pair of hands kept working. The far pair had gone still, folded, which for an ophim was the same as a human's white knuckles. Except we did 11,000 kilometers since midnight, and the line is 2,000 of those kilometers back that way. Kessa pulled herself into the command couch and looked at the thing she had been avoiding looking at, the way you avoid looking at a wound until you're ready to know how bad it is, the forward screen. Stars, ordinary stars, scattered ordinary black. The most feared volume of space in the charted galaxy looked like a quiet night over any harbor in the Accord, and somehow that was worse than teeth would have been. Behind her, the rest of her crew arrived in the order their bodies allowed. Pim first, 14 and molting at the collar already, stress shed flakes of pale shell drifting off the young Lasker like snow he was embarrassed by. Then Yent Caro, the Drev supercargo, broad as a cargo door and sweating thin chalk lines down the plates of his neck before anyone had told him anything. Last came Doran Hask, the old Brennick engineer, 60 years of burn scars and one clouded eye, moving without hurry because in Doran's experience hurry had never once improved vacuum. "Say it out loud," Doran said. "Rooms get smaller when nobody says it." "We're across the line," Kessa said. "We crossed in our sleep." Yent made a sound like a hull popping its rivets. Pim went very still, which was how Lasker screamed. "Then we burned back," Yent said. "Now, this moment, before anything in here notices the meat is awake. Captain, now, while the dark is still." "Lo," Kessa said, "plot a return." "I have been trying to plot a return since 0341. Lo turned her long head, and there was something in the set of her 4-fingered hands that Kessa had never seen on a working nav officer in her life. Not fear of the thing outside the ship. Fear of the thing inside it, Captain. The nav core refuses. She put it on the main screen, and the 5 of them read it together in the cockpit's amber half-light. "Route computation denied. Vessel transit log records crossing of the demarcation. Per Accord Standing Statute 7, containment of contaminated vectors. This unit will not generate return routing into Accord space. This denial is not an error. Do not resubmit." "It's broken," Yent said. "It's old and it's broken, that's all. We'll cold start it. It is not broken." Lo's voice had dropped to the register her people used for funerals. "I went into the firmware. The denial is original equipment. It's shipped from the foundry inside every licensed nav core in the Accord, mine, yours, the ones on patrol cutters, the ones on the liners that carry school children. It has been sitting in every ship we have ever flown, waiting, since before any of us was born." She closed the panel gently as if it might wake. "It isn't malfunctioning, Captain. It's obeying." Nobody said anything. The air system ticked. Somewhere aft, condensation dripped in the galley with perfect indifference, because every spacer in the Accord knew the catechism, and the catechism ran the other way. The demarcation kept the humans in. The line was the cage and the galaxy held the key. That was the shape of the story, the shape it had always had, told in dockside bars and academy lecture halls, and the soft warnings mothers gave children who pointed at the amber edge of a chart. Humans burned themselves to legend in the last push centuries ago, and what was left of them was sealed behind the line like ash in an urn, and the Accord in its mercy and its wisdom kept the seal. Except the seal, it turned out, was built facing the wrong way. The lock was not on the human's door. It was in the Accord's own ships, in the thin margin's own mind, and what it locked was the way home. Kessa heard her own voice come out steadier than she felt, which was a captain's whole job. Fuel state. Doran had the numbers without checking, because Doran always had the numbers. 31% in the mains, dregs in the maneuver tanks. 1 good long burn, or 2 short ones and a prayer. Coasting home unplotted. He tipped his scarred head aft, toward the line, toward the shallows beyond it, that whole drowned country of gravity reefs and mass shadows that only a licensed navcore could thread through the reefs, blind, on a third of a tank. I've done stupid things in 40 years of engine rooms. I never did that one, because the men who tried it are still out there. Parts of them. Then we worked the problem, Kessa said. First question, how does an anchored ship cross a border in its sleep? We were moored to a dead marker on the legal side of the line. Anchored to a corpse, 11 kilometers off its hull, transponder dark, exactly the way every smuggler in the shoal has done it for 100 years. She looked around the cockpit. Dead markers don't walk. Pym spoke for the first time, and his voice cracked in the middle of it. Captain, the anchor line's still attached. He brought the aft optics up onto the screen, and the cockpit went quiet in a new way. They had moored the night before in the shadow of Style 14. That was the smuggler's name for it. One of the great black mile-long markers strung along the human side of the demarcation like fence posts for a fence nobody had ever seen. 2 centuries of charts listed the styles as derelict. Tombstones, the dock stories said. Monuments some dead human age had raised and then died too thoroughly to switch off. Their hulls returned no heat, no signal, no light. Patrol sweeps ignored them, and so the deep shadow of a style was the best place on the whole border for a small dark ship full of unstamped cargo wait out a shoal patrol sweep, 11 safe kilometers off a dead thing's flank. The aft cameras showed Style 14 not 11 kilometers away but 200 meters away, filling the frame like a black cliff. And from a recess in that cliff, a recess that had not existed on any survey ever filed, ran a tow harness, not their anchor cable, a harness. Woven, cushioned, fitted to the thin margin's hard points with the kind of care you'd use on something fragile, holding the little freighter the way a large hand holds an egg. It walked, Lowe whispered. We anchored to it, and it walked, and it carried us. It rescued us, Doran said slowly. He was leaning into the screen with his good eye narrowed. Look at the harness geometry. That's not a grapple. Grapples grab where they can reach. That's a cradle. Spread loads, padded contact, mind the paint. Something, took one look at a cold, quiet ship hanging dark off its hull and concluded it was a derelict full of sleeping souls. And it did what you do with a derelict full of souls. The old engineer let out a breath that was almost a laugh and entirely without humor. It brought us in out of the weather. Out of the weather, Yent repeated, chalk running freely down his neck plates now. Into the one storm in the galaxy nobody ever sails home from. I wanted on the record that I said we should drop the harness and burn. Noted, Kessa said. Low. Is anything out there talking? Everything out there is quiet. Low paused. Was quiet. Captain receiving. Old open band tray tong. Her hands hovered. It's addressed to us. Put it in the room. The voice that filled the cockpit was not a machine voice, or if it was a machine that had been taught to speak by someone patient, unhurried, lightly accented in a way that matched no accent any of them knew. Courteous the way old institutions are courteous, with the courtesy of something that has done this many times and intends to do it correctly every time. Good morning, Thin Margin, it said. This is the watch at Style 14. Be advised at 0340 local, your vessel was observed adrift and unresponsive in the tide lane with 5 souls aboard and was taken under tow for your safety. No charge attaches to rescue. Your hull is undamaged. Your anchor was fouled and has been repaired. A pause exactly long enough to be polite. We apologize for waking you. 5 spacers stared at the speaker grill the way their ancestors had stared at thunder. It knew their ship's name. It knew their count of souls. It had read their dark, silent transponder off Smuggler's hull, invisible, by every art Kessa owned, to the best patrol sensors in the Accord. At a glance, in the night, and instead of guns it had sent a cradle. And it had repaired their anchor, which meant something out there had hands. Tide lane, Lowe murmured. It said tide lane. The charts say there are no currents on the border. The charts say this whole shelf is still water. Her far hands had unfolded. She was working again fast. Captain, it's true. I can see it now that I know to look. There's a mass tide running along the line, slow and wide as a sleeping river. We didn't drift through carelessness. We anchored in a current the Accord's own charts swear doesn't exist. Charts lie at the edges, girl, Doran said. Always have. The interesting question is who paid for the ink. Kessa keyed the transmitter before her crew's fear could finish becoming her own. Captain's whole job. Style 14, Thin Margin. Received and thank you for the tow. Behind her she heard Yent's plates grind at the thank you. Be advised in return, we crossed the demarcation without intent. We need to go home. Our navigation corps refuses to route us back across the line. Request assistance. The pause this time was longer. When the voice returned, the courtesy in it had not changed, but something underneath it had, some old, worn patience like a step hollowed by feet. Thin Margin, we know about the lock. We did not put it there, and we cannot take it out. The denial you read this morning belongs to the Accord. It has shipped in every core they license for a very long time. There is exactly one authority that can give you back your way home, and it is not at this style, a beat. It is at the table, deeper in. Deeper in, Yent said. Deeper in, of course. The way out of the forbidden zone is more forbidden zone. Captain, it's a lure. Every story agrees on one thing, the line eats ships, and now we know it eats them politely. Every story also agreed the styles were tombstones, Kessa said quietly, and one of them just fixed our anchor that shut the cockpit up. She looked at the plot. The heading Style 14 was offering had appeared there without her authorization, not forced on the ship, just laid gently alongside it, the way you'd leave food at the door of something shy. A lane, leading inward, marked at intervals with waypoints that bore no accord designations at all. The legend of her childhood said that past the line lay ash and teeth and a silence that swallowed fleets. The lane on her plot looked like a road that someone swept. Run the arithmetic, then, the way her father had taught her before the spindle took his license and most of his name. Burn for the line on a third of a tank and thread the reefs blind. The margin dies in the dark within a week, and the syndicate's debt, 62,000 standards, secured against the ship and against her family's surety, which meant against her younger sister's apprentice wages for the next 30 years, lands on Brell on Meridian Shoal like a falling crane. Sit here and do nothing, same ending, slower, with the added insult of starving in sight of the border. Or take the swept road deeper into the most forbidden sky in the galaxy, on the word of a polite black monolith, to a thing called the table that might unlock the way home. 3 doors. 2 of them were just coffins with different lids. Low, Kessa said. Accept the heading, Captain Yent started, Yent. She turned the command couch to face them all. The shaking boy, the chalk-streaked broker, the still navigator, the old engineer with his arms folded like a man watching weather, her crew, her debt, all of it, the kind no syndicate writes down. Here's where we are. The Accord built a lock into our own ship and never told us, which means the people who taught us the story of this place left things out of it. I don't know what's down that lane, but I know what's behind us because I can count, and what's behind us is a slow way to die that doesn't even pay off the ship. She let that sit. We're smugglers. We've spent our whole working lives learning one trade, how to cross lines other people drew and come home anyway. This is the same run it's always been. It's just longer. Doran's burn-scared face folded into something that was almost a smile. Longest haul I ever shipped on, and I've shipped on some. Pym, strap in aft of Low. Yent, secure the hold. If we're going to be boarded by legends, I want the manifest looking respectable. That got the ghost of a sound out of the boy, not quite a laugh, but blood adjacent. Doran, give me the mains warm in 20. The crew broke for their stations because motion is mercy, and a good captain rations it like fuel. Kessa took one last look aft before the engines lit. On the screen, the tow harness was releasing, segment by segment, unhurried, each contact pad lifting off her hull like a hand, making sure the patient could stand. The repaired anchor came home into its housing with a click she felt through the deck, sweeter than the original fitting had ever seated in 4 years of ownership. Somebody out there had not just fixed it. Somebody had improved it. Thin margin, said the watch at Style 14, soft on the open band. You are released and clear. The lane ahead is swept. Water and air at the first way station are free. They always have been. A pause, and then, with that same hollowed step gentleness, the first sentence of the rest of Kesavir's life. Welcome to human space. We're sorry it took a current to bring you. The mains lit. The thin margin swung her bow away from everything her crew had ever been told was true, and went down the swept road into the dark. The lane held them like a habit. For the first 6 hours, nobody spoke above the necessary, and the necessary was thin. Coarse confirmations from Low, fuel flow from Doran, the small liturgy of a working ship. Kessa kept the forward optics at full gain and made herself look at the legend with both eyes open. The legend was clean. That was the first wrongness, and it arrived quietly. Every border shelf in the Accord wore its history like scar tissue. Drift junk, slag, lost containers, the bones of bad decisions tumbling end over end for centuries. The approaches to any Accord port were a museum of negligence. But the lane inward from Style 14 was swept the way the watch had said it was swept. Not empty, tended. Twice they passed rock, honest stone, the kind that holds hulls. And both times the rock wore a small, steady marker light and a gravity fence. The hazard not destroyed but labeled, the way you'd label a step that wanted care. Somebody maintained the inside of the most feared border in the galaxy like a stairwell in a public building. Who sweeps a graveyard? Pym asked the cockpit at large around hour 7. Nobody answered him, because the only honest answer was the question again, slower. At hour 9, Lo flagged the first beacon that wasn't a style. It hung at a lane junction like a buoy in a harbor. Human-built, old, its skin micro-pitted by centuries of dust, and it was talking. Not to them, to everyone. A wide, slow, patient broadcast on the oldest open band cycling in language after language. And that was the second wrongness. Because the third language in the cycle was Offham, Old Offham. Temple Offham, the dialect of Lo's grandmother's grandmother, extinct outside of hymnals for 300 years. Play it, Kessa said. Lo's hands didn't move for a moment. Then she put it in the room, and a human voice, recorded by the grain of it a very long time ago, spoke to them gently in a dead holy tongue none of them should have heard. This side of a funeral. If you are hearing this, you are lost or you are looking. Both are welcome. This lane is kept. Water, air, and harbor are free at every way station, to every keel, of every people, always. You owe nothing for kindness. You will not be held. You will not be turned in. Whoever told you to fear this sky, ask them, when you go home, who drew your charts. The recording moved on, into a language none of them knew, and then another and another. 40 tongues, 50. Stop counting, Yent said hoarsely. To no one, to himself. Stop counting the languages. 62, said Lo, who could not stop counting any more than she could stop breathing. And Captain, 6 of them are dead languages, dead like Temple Offham. Languages that haven't been spoken under any sun in the Accord for centuries. She turned from her board, and her flat ration calm had a crack in it now, and what showed through the crack wasn't fear. It was vertigo. Who keeps a lighthouse burning in 62 languages for people who were all taught to never ever come? Nobody answered her either. The thin margin went deeper. The legend stayed clean and quiet and lit. And very slowly, in the amber half-light of her cockpit, Kessa Viri began to be afraid of something new. Not of the dark ahead of her ship, but of the dawning shape of the thing behind her, back across the line, wearing the Accord's flag and her own childhood stories like a coat. The first lie had been small, as first lies often are. Dead markers, it said. Tombstones, don't look. The markers were not dead. They were waiting. And the thin margin fell down the swept lane toward the table at the bottom of every story she'd ever been told, while the stiles of the demarcation watched her go with the patience of things that had been waiting a very long time for anyone at all to ask the right question. The first way station came up on the second day, and it broke Yent Caro in a way no monster could have. It was a harbor platform the size of a village square, old human steel under centuries of careful paint. Hanging at a lane junction with its docking ring lit a soft constant white, no guns. No fences, no challenge on approach, just a berth that fit them, and a gangway that pressurized itself to thin margin standard atmosphere without being asked, which meant the platform had read their hull type and their biology off their approach vector, and adjusted its own air to be polite. Inside, the way station was a pantry. That was the only honest word. Racks and lockers and cold stores stocked labeled, immaculate, and the labels were the thing, because the labels were in everyone's language and the stock was for everyone's body. Shelf after shelf, species after species, Offham reed grain in vacuum casks, Brennick iron broth concentrate, the good kind, the kind Doran grumbled you couldn't get rimward of the shoal anymore, Lasker malt balm in tubs, with dosage instructions written out in the careful schoolbook script of someone who had learned Lasker as a second language, and a full bay of Drev chalk salts, electrolyte graded, stacked to the ceiling. Yent stood in front of the chalk salts for a long time. His people sweated their fear out as mineral. A frightened Drev far from home died slowly of his own chemistry without them. And every Drev who shipped out carried that knowledge in his spine the way other species carried a fear of drowning. They stock for us, he said finally. His voice had nothing left of the Holdbroker's bluster. This is the forbidden zone. Nobody comes here. Nobody has come here in living memory. And they keep, he picked up a tub, turned it, read the date stamp, put it back as if it had burned him, fresh chalk salts. Rotated. This batch is 8 months old. Somebody walked down this aisle 8 months ago, checked the dates, and put in fresh stock, in case a frightened Drev they had no reason to ever expect came through their forbidden front door and needed not to die. Take what we need, Kessa said quietly. The recording said it's free. That's the part I can't, Jens plates ground. Captain, I broker cargo. I have spent 30 years putting prices on things. Everything has a price. That's not cynicism, that's just bookkeeping. The whole Accord runs on it, and this place doesn't bill. He gestured at the racks, the lockers, the patient-lit shelves, and his hand was shaking. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I can negotiate with anything that bills. I have no idea how to negotiate with this. They took water, air, reed grain, iron broth, chalk salts, and balm. Kessa left their best bottle of shoal amber on the counter by the hatch because she was her father's daughter, and you didn't leave a harbor without paying something, even if the only currency the harbor took was the gesture. When they undocked, the platform's running lights blinked twice, acknowledgement, or farewell, or something for which she had no word yet. Locked and remembered, said Lo, watching the platform's transponder. It recorded the bottle. It filed it under. She tilted her head. Gifts. There's a ledger called Gifts, Captain, It has a lot of entries. The lane bent deeper. The dread, which should have eased with full tanks and a stock galley, changed key instead. Because the legend had a shape, and the shape was coming apart one quiet increment at a time. Every dockside story Kessa had grown up on agreed on the architecture of this place. The fortress dark, the sleeping arsenals, the fields of dead fleets, the great wall of human menace that justified the line, the patrols, the statute lurking in every nav core. For 2 more days the thin margin fell down the swept lane at 1/4 burn, and the optics gathered in the truth at full gain. And the truth was this: there was no wall. There were road markers in 62 languages. There were hazard fences around honest rock. There was a pantry with her crew's deaths individually anticipated and individually prevented, 8 months in advance, by somebody who restocked shelves for ghosts. "Where are the fortress worlds?" Pym asked on the 3rd day, because the boy had been raised on the same stories with fresher paint. He had the chart up, the Accord chart, the one every schoolchild saw, with its amber line and its sparse grim annotations on the far side. Interdicted, hazard, arsenal volume, do not approach. He had cross-checked 3 of the annotations against their actual track. "We passed through one of them yesterday. The arsenal volume. There's nothing there. There isn't even rock there. It's just empty lane and one beacon singing in dead languages." He looked up, molt flakes drifting. "Why would you draw teeth on a map where there aren't any?" "Same reason you paint a dog on a gate," Doran said, "when you can't afford a dog. That's the outside of the gate, old man. This is supposed to be the inside. The teeth are supposed to be in here." Pym's voice cracked again. "Who is the map for?" Nobody answered him. The cockpit was getting good at silence. Kessa logged the question instead, in the captain's book her father had kept before her, in block letters on a page of its own, because some questions are cargo and you don't let cargo shift. Who is the map for? On the 4th day, the lane gave them a ship. Low called it at extreme range, a hull, inbound on a crossing lane no transponder Kessa's library recognized. For 10 minutes the old stories got their hooks back into everyone. Even Doran came forward and stood with his hand on the back of the command couch, and Jens chalk ran in streams, and the cockpit air went thin with 5 species worth of inherited terror as the unknown hull closed. It was a tanker. A patched, unlovely working tanker, the kind of hull that hauls fuel in every harbor in creation, with bumpers scarred from 1,000 dockings, and along its flank in plain trade script, Roads Authority 9, tender. It matched their course without fuss, the way a tug noses up to a barge, and a voice came up on the band, a live voice. Unrecorded, unrehearsed, somebody chewing something by the sound of it, who swallowed first out of courtesy. A human voice, the first live one any of them had ever heard. "Morning, thin margin. Saw your burn rate on the junction log. You're running lean for where you're headed." A pause, friendly, appalling. "Top you off?" Kessa looked at her crew. Her crew looked at her. 4 years of command, 62,000 standards of debt, a childhood of stories with teeth, and the legend of forbidden human space wanted to know if they'd like a fill-up. "Roads Authority," she said carefully, "thin margin. Yes, thank you. Be advised we can't pay. Our funds don't clear this side of the line. Nothing clears this side of the line." The voice was unbothered. "Money's one of the things we left at the door. Hold your attitude steady. This takes a minute." The tender came alongside. Through the optics they watched the transfer boom walk out. Old, immaculate, hand-painted with a line of small icons Kessa couldn't resolve at first, until Lowe sharpened the image and they resolved, and she wished they hadn't. Little stylized hulls, dozens of them, each one different, each one painted with the careful pride of a worker marking jobs done. Ships refueled. Ships of every silhouette in the Accord and silhouettes the Accord had never catalogued. The boom seated, fuel flowed, real, clean, foundry-grade fuel, better than the cut stock the shoal yards sold her at full price. Pym leaned into the transmitter before anyone could stop him, because he was 14 and his species screamed by going still, and he had been still for 4 days. "Are you going to eat us?" "Pym?" Yent lunged. The band was quiet for a moment. Then the human laughed, not at the boy, Kessa would think later, replaying it, around him, the way you laugh to make room for someone in a cold doorway. "We get that one a lot," the voice said gently. "No, son. Nobody's going to eat you. Nobody's even going to ask your cargo manifest, which between us is probably for the best." Kessa's spine went cold. The voice rolled on, mild as morning. "You'll want the harbor at halfway reach 2 days down lane. Real beds, real food. People to ask your questions at, which I can hear you're carrying a hold full of." "Why?" The word left Kessa before she'd chosen it, and it came out with 3 days of vertigo behind it, harder than she meant. "Why the lane? Why the pantry? Why the fuel? We were taught, everything we were ever taught says this sky should be killing us. Instead, it keeps fixing things and feeding us and apologizing. Why?" The pause stretched. Fuel ticked over in the lines. When the human answered, the friendliness had folded itself away into something older. That's a table question, Captain. The table answers. I just pour. The boom sealed itself, walked home racked. But I'll give you a free one, traveler to traveler, since you've got the look of somebody doing the arithmetic at night. The tender's engines warmed. It began to drift off their beam, back toward its crossing lane, a working hull on a working road in a sky with no one in it. You keep saying forbidden, all of you. Every crew that comes through says forbidden. So ask yourself the only question on this whole road worth the burn. Forbidden to who? By who? The tender pulled away. Its little painted hulls glittered once in the thin margin's running lights, and then it was a point, and then it was gone. And the lane was theirs again, swept and quiet and lit all the way down into the dark. Nobody spoke for a long while. Then Doran pushed off the command couch, headed aft, and paused at the cockpit hatch. I've been alive a long time, he said. To all of them and none of them. Long enough to learn how kept things feel, kept engines, kept books, kept gardens. He nodded once at the forward screen, at the road, at the patient lights. This isn't a ruin, children. It's not a graveyard, and it's not a cage. Everything on this road is kept, and kept things mean a keeper, and keepers. He tapped the hatch frame twice with one burn-scared knuckle. An engineer blessing a weld. Keepers are always keeping something for someone. Sleep, 2 days to harbor. Halfway Reach announced itself first as music on the navigation band. Lo heard it half a day out and said nothing for an hour, running it again and again through her boards with her far hands folded so tightly the knuckles paled. The lane's waypoint markers, which had ticked along the whole way down in plain pulse code, were transmitting something layered here. Pulse code on top, and underneath it, slow and structural, a progression of tones. Captain. Her voice had the funeral register again, but bent strangely, like a hymn sung in a kitchen. The waypoints sing. Star tables. Low turned. Often do not weep, their grief runs to stillness like Lasker's fear. She was very still. My people's old navigation wasn't written. It was sung tables, star positions carried in temple progressions, mother to daughter, before we ever had cores. It's how we crossed our home oceans, and it's how the songs say we crossed the dark, long ago. In the before verses nobody can place on any chart. Dead knowledge. Ceremony. I learned the progressions as a child the way you learn a prayer. Sounds first, meaning never. She put it in the room. The waypoint tones, slow, patient, threading under the pulse code like a river under a bridge. This is a sung table, Captain.
Correct.
Current. Updated for drift. Someone down this road is still singing my people's dead star songs to their road markers, and the stars the song places, her voice finally moved. They aren't accord stars. I don't know whose sky this song is reading, but my grandmother's grandmother would have known how to fly it. Kessa looked down the lane, where the harbor lights of Halfway Reach were just beginning to resolve. A moonlet, ringed with birth, hung in the window of a slate blue gas giant like a coin in a vast dark hand. Traffic moved around it. Actual traffic, a dozen hulls, 2 dozen, small and large, none of them military, drifting in and out of a place that did not exist on any chart she owned. In the heart of a sky her whole civilization had agreed was a tomb. Thin margin, said the harbor band, warm and live, Halfway Reach approach. We have you, and we have your berth. Slip 9, follow the greens. Kitchens are open. First night's on the harbor, it always is. And then the harbor master said the thing that finished what the chalk salts had started, because the harbor master said it in Drev, not trade Drev. Old Drev, hill country Drev, the supper table dialect Yent Caro's great-grandmother had been mocked out of speaking in an Accord integration school 140 years ago, a dialect that survived in exactly one place in the universe as far as Yent knew, half remembered in his own mouth, in the endearments he used when he was very tired and thought no one was listening. Come in slow, cousin, the harbor master of Halfway Reach said, in the dead voice of Yent's own kitchen. Soup's hot. You're with your people now. Yent Caro sat down on the cockpit deck, all 400 pounds of him, the way a building sits down, and put his face in his hands, and the thin margin followed the green lights in. Slip 9 took their lines like any harbor anywhere, and that was its own quiet violence, the sheer ordinariness of it. Bollards, fenders, a dockhand waving them in with 2 lit batons, except the dockhand was an Opham youth with harbor tattoos, working alongside a human woman in a welder's apron, and the 2 of them were arguing comfortably about a fitting the way people argue, who have argued for years, and intend to keep the argument forever, because it's theirs. Kessa came down the gangway first, captain's privilege, captain's burden, and stood on the soil of the legend. Halfway Reach was a town. Under its dome, the moonlet held maybe 20,000 souls, terraced down the inside of an old mining bowl, market streets, hanging gardens fat with 6 worlds produce, laundry lines, a school letting out in a spill of children, and the children were the things she could not look away from. Drev children, Opham children, human children, Lasker children shedding happy molt all over a climbing frame. Children of 3 species she couldn't name, and children unmistakably of parents who were two species at once in every way that mattered, racing each other down the terraces with the total indifference of the young toward everything their existence disproved. Captain Vire. The harbor master was waiting at the foot of the slip, a Drev woman, old, broad, anvil-solid, wearing the same harbor braid as every other worker on the dock, and carrying the authority of someone who had never once needed more than that. Vika Sorn. You came down the style road, which means you've had 4 days of your own ghosts for company. The soup helps. The questions help more. Most crews start with the same one, so let me save you the wind-up. She gestured broadly at the town, the gardens, the children, the absurd singing ordinariness of it all. Yes, we're real. No, nobody's keeping us here. The gate you came through swings both ways and always has. For us, it's your ships they lock, and it isn't the humans who lock them. You know about the Nav statute. Child, everyone in this town is here because of the Nav statute. Vakasorn turned and walked, and they followed, because she was the kind of person you followed. 300 years ago, my people came down that same lane, the Vale Flotilla. You won't know the name. I know the name. Jens' voice came out wrong. He had stopped dead in the middle of the dock. Every Drev knows the name. The Vale Flotilla is a grief tale. 40,000 hill country Drev in 11 ships, packed out of the Peller famine on debt passage, and the convoy masters cut costs on the border survey, and the whole flotilla strayed over the demarcation and was eaten. The Accord held memorials. There's a wall on Peller with the names. My clan has names on that wall. His plates were grinding softly continuously, a sound Kessa had never heard a Drev make. It's the story they tell us when we're small, so we'll fear the line. Lost to the dark, all of them. Eaten. Vekasorn's laugh had no humor in it at all. It was the laugh you keep next to a scar. 40,000 of us crossed the line starving, cheated, and dying of bad water, and the dark that ate us pumped our holds full of clean air, towed us to harbor, fed us for a year, and asked us one question. That's all the dark wanted. Do you want to go home, or do you want a home? She stopped at the head of the market street and let them see the town again properly this time. 1,100 of us went back. The humans took them to the line themselves, everyone who asked, and put them across with full tanks. You know what the Accord did with them? Sealed them. Transit hygiene. Contaminated vectors. 1,100 witnesses, quarantine questioned, discredited, scattered, and the wall on Peller got 1,100 more names, because it was easier to call them dead than to let them answer questions at supper. Tables. She started walking again. The rest of us stayed and built this. 300 years. The harbor feeds anyone who docks, because once when it mattered, it fed us. The soup was hot, and it was hill country soup, and Yent Caro ate 3 bowls of it with tears running into all of them, while a dockside kitchen full of strangers studiously failed to notice, which was its own kind of welcome. Kessa ate too, and watched and did the thing she had been doing since Style 14. She kept the ledger. Because dread doesn't vanish when it's disproved. It converts. Every fear the legend had installed in her was being paid out, one by one, into something that had no name yet, and the exchange rate was terrible. It would have been so much easier if human space had teeth. Teeth she had a category for. This, the pantry, the tender, the soup, the children, this required her to do arithmetic about home, and the arithmetic kept coming out the same way. And the way it came out was, the monsters are the people who taught me the word monster. You're doing it right now. A human had sat down across the table, the first human being Kesaviri had ever seen with her own eyes. Younger than she'd imagined, the wardens of a legend, brown, weathered, work-handed, a road authority patch on one shoulder, faded soft. The woman nodded at whatever was happening on Kessa's face. The accounting. Everybody from outside gets the same look around the second bowl, like the floor's been pulled and the fall hasn't started yet. She put out a hand, palm up, some old custom. Kessa, not knowing it, laid her own slate-gray palm on it, and that seemed to be right. Asha Reyes, I keep the road you came in on. Sections 4 through 9, the singing waypoints, those are mine. Lo will want to marry you, Kessa said before her manners caught up, and the human laughed the same way the tender pilot had, making room. The Otham progressions, right? Your navigator should sit with our canters before you go down lane. She's going to hear a lot more of her grandmother's sky where you're headed, and it lands easier the second time. Reyes's eyes were friendly and entirely too watchful for a person who maintained buoys. You're for the table. Then, the anchorage. We need our nav unlocked. They say there's exactly one authority. There is, but the road to it runs through the cradle shelf, and there's no route around, because there shouldn't be. Reyes turned her cup in her hands, and Kessa watched the friendliness bank itself like a stove for the night. Captain, I'm going to give you the only briefing that matters, and it isn't about hazards. The cradle is the safest sky you'll ever fly. It's about time, whatever schedule's pushing you, debts, family, the Accord's clocks, leave it in your hold when you make the shelf. People need time in the cradle. The crews who rush it are the ones who come apart. Come apart how? What's in it? Nothing that will touch your ship. Reyes stood, collected cup, paused. What's in the cradle, Captain Vire, is the answer to the question the tender man gave you for free. She left a beat. They knew everything, the keepers of this road. Everything moved on it, even questions. Forbidden to who by who. You'll have it before the table. We find it's better that way, the table's for deciding what to do about the truth. It's no good for surviving it. The cradle's for that. She made to go and stopped because Kessa said, why doesn't anyone just tell us? The whole kitchen didn't go quiet. That would have been theater, and Halfway Reach didn't deal in it. But Reyes stood for a moment with her back half turned, and when she came around there was 300 years of road keeping on her face, and underneath it something so much older that Kessa's skin prickled at the temples. Because we did, Asha Reyes said simply. For the first 100 years we told every soul who crossed straight out dockside first hour, and they broke. Right here, in this kitchen, good people, brave people, they sat where you're sitting and we handed them the truth like a sack of iron and watched it bend them. Because the truth isn't about us, Captain. It's about you, all of you. It's your history we keep in here. And a history has a weight, and you have to walk up to a weight like that, or it staves your chest in. She set her cup in the wash rack with the deliberateness of ritual. So now there's a road, the stiles, the pantry, the tender, the soup, the whole lane, every kind light on it, is one long walk up. 300 years of learning how to hand a heavy thing to a stranger gently. You think you've been traveling toward the truth since stile 14. A nod, dockward down lane, into the deep of the forbidden dark. You've been being carried toward it, the way we carry everything, slow and swept and lit. She left. The kitchen noise folded back in over the silence she'd made, kindly, like water over a stone. They stayed at Halfway Reach 3 days, because the margin needed her injectors flushed, and Kessa needed her crew to stand in gardens. Doran spent the days elbow-deep in the harbor's machine shop, swapping techniques with a human millwright and a drev fitter, and came back each evening with that specific contentment of old tradesmen who have found their own kind. Pym stopped molting. He ran the terraces with a pack of harbor children, and on the second evening, Kessa found him sitting on a garden wall, very still again, but the new stillness the one she was learning to read differently. Captain, he said, nobody here has asked me whose I am. She sat next to him. Below them, the dome lights were dimming toward the harbor's soft purple evening, and the gardens breathed. Every port in the Accord first questioned, whose is the boy? What line? What registry? What bond? Pym turned his small gray-green face up to her. He had been a foundling on a dock at 6. She had signed for him at 12 because the alternative signing for him had been the spindle. Here they just ask if I've eaten. I keep waiting for the other question, and it keeps not coming. Is that, he hunted for it, is that what this whole place is? The question not coming? I don't know what this place is yet, Kessa said honestly. But I'm starting to think it remembers something everybody else agreed to forget. And the remembering is why it's kind. And the forgetting is why it's forbidden. That's backwards from the story. Yes, she said, I think everything is. On the third morning, Yent Caro came to the slip-in harbor braid. He didn't have to say it. He'd found the rolls on the first night. Halfway kept its founding registry in the town hall, open on a stand like a shrine, and the Vale Flotilla's 11 ships were written there hull by hull, family by family. And the third hull's third page carried the name Caro 18 times. Cousins. The branch of his clan the wall on Pellar called dead, with 3 centuries of living descendants terraced down a garden bowl in the heart of the forbidden zone, 4 of whom had already claimed him for supper twice. 30 years I put prices on things, he said. His chalk was running but slow, ceremonial. A drev deciding, not a drev afraid. I finally found the thing I can't. Captain, there's a wall on Pellar that says my people end. They don't end. They garden. I'm going to learn what my family's been for 300 years, and when you come back through, his voice failed and he rebuilt it. When you come back through, you'll eat at my cousin's table, and that's a contract. Kessa released him from his articles on the dockside with the old words and her thumb seal. And then, because the old words were not enough for 30 years, she did what dock crews do and embraced him while the harbor pretended not to look. Losing him felt like dropping ballast and like losing a wall of her own. Both at once, the road's exchange rate again. One more thing. Yent caught her arm at the gangway, lowered his voice into the supper table dialect, as if the words were safer there. I brokered freight my whole life, so here a broker. I've been reading this town's manifest for 3 days the way I read everything. Halfway Reach imports nothing, Kessa. No external supply line. Everything under the dome. They grow, mill, smelt, or are given by the road. And still the pantry at every way station is stocked for 60 species. And still the fuel is foundry grade. And still the stiles patrol 300 years deep. He held her eyes. Somebody is provisioning a kindness the size of a sky, sustained at a loss for centuries for strangers who were all taught never to come. As a broker, I'm telling you, no ledger balances like that. Whatever's at the bottom of this road, whatever the cradle is, it isn't charity. His grip tightened, gentle, enormous. It's a debt being paid. Mind yourself. Debts that size change the people who find out about them. The thin margin cast off at harbor noon, 4 crew where there had been 5, tanks full, injectors clean, and a sung star table riding her navigation band like a hand on her shoulder. Vecca Sorn cleared them down lane personally, and her last transmission followed them out past the gas giant's slate blue limb. Margin, your lane swept through to the shelf, and the cradle watch knows your hull and your hearts. Fly slow when the sky goes strange, cousin. It's not danger you'll be feeling, it's recognition. Kesaviri didn't understand that then. 2 days later, the thin margin crossed onto the cradle shelf, and the stars came up out of the dark in shapes her navigator had only ever heard sung, and she began to. It happened at the change of watch. Lo had the con, Kessa was half asleep in the command couch, and the shelf's first stars resolved out of the long dark like a shoreline, a great drift of suns, old and golden, banked deep across the forward screen where the Accord's charts showed nothing but a hatched gray smear and the word void. Lo made a sound Kessa had never heard from her, not the funeral register. Older than that, Captain. Her 4 hands were spread flat on the console, holding on to it. Wake up. Wake up and look at the sky. I'm looking. What am I? Sing the third progression, Lo whispered, and then did. 15 notes. The children's verse, the one every Ophim hatchling learned before its first molt, sounds first, meaning never, because the meaning pointed at no sky anyone had ever stood under. Her thin reed voice walked up the old intervals, and as it walked, she lifted one hand and touched the screen, star by star, in time the song fit. Note to sun, interval to distance, the whole golden drift laid out across the dark, exactly as the dead grandmothers had said it would be, 15 stars in a rising line like a flight of birds. The before verses, Lo said. Her voice was shaking now, evenly like a struck bell. The sky the songs read. The one our scholars had decided was allegory because it matched nothing. It matches this. Kessa, my people have been singing this view, this one, from this bearing. You only see the flight of 15 in this shape from inside the approach lane of. She stopped. Recalculated, because she was low, because the instrument always got one more chance to be wrong. It wasn't wrong. Of home, she finished, very quietly. The songs are a road home, and home is in the forbidden zone, and I am flying the verse my mother sang me to sleep with. Kessa looked at the golden shoreline of suns, and Vecca Sorn's last transmission finally unfolded itself in her chest. It's not danger you'll be feeling, it's recognition. Margin said, a new voice on the band, human, low, unhurried, with the particular gentleness they were learning, meant you were getting close to something heavy. Cradle watch. We have you inbound on the Susurran lane. Take your time, there's no traffic and no clock out here. When your navigator is ready, not before, we'll bring you into the world her songs are about. A pause. We find it goes better if the crew eats something first, truly. Eat first. They ate. Nobody tasted it. Susurran came up over 6 hours, first as a star, then as a disk, then as a world, and the world was lit. Kessa had braced for ruin. Some scorched museum of a planet, a tomb with weather. What turned below the thin margin instead was a green and gold world wearing a ring of slow silver's petals in low orbit mirror sails, thousands of them drifting in patient formation, catching the old sun and pouring it down onto the night side in soft, deliberate rivers, so that no city on the surface ever stood fully in the dark. And there were cities, whole coastlines of them, pale stone terraces stepping down to quicksilver seas, windows intact, bridges intact, harbors intact, and every one of them empty, and every one of them clean, and every one of them tended, 800 years after the last Ophim left. The lights are for nobody, Pym whispered at the optics. There's nobody down there and the lights are still. He stopped because he was 14 and even he heard it. The lights were not for nobody. The lights were for them. A keeper met them at the anchorage platform above the largest coastal city, a human woman, in her middle 30s, weather brown, in plain work grays with a sprig of some silver-leafed plant pinned at the collar, who introduced herself as Mara Quist, third of her line to keep Susurran, and who greeted Lo Sen in flawless, careful temple Ophim with an accent 8 centuries out of date, the way the language was pronounced when it was alive. Be welcome to the world of your grandmothers, Mara Quist said. It has been kept for you. Lo stood very still on the platform deck for a long moment. Then she answered, haltingly, the holy tongue clumsy in a living conversation, because no Ophim in 300 years had used it to actually speak to someone. Who kept it? We did, the keeper said simply. We promised. The shuttle went down through clean air to a city whose name Lo had sung her whole life without knowing it was an address. Susurran of the Quays, the old capital, First city of the Ophim people laid out below the falling shuttle exactly as the temple progressions described. The 7 harbors, the white ascending terraces, the long seawall like a sleeping arm. Mara Quist flew them in herself, low and slow along the waterfront, and talked the whole way in the voice of a woman who had given this tour many times and had never once let it become routine. The preservation fields hold the stone and keep the weather kind. The gardens we do by hand. There are about 400 of us on Cessarin at any given time, keepers, cantors, masons, gardeners. We rotate in from the anchorage on 5-year postings, except the ones like me, who are born to it and stay. She banked gently around a harbor tower, whose great bronze bell hung silent and polished in its housing. Everything is as it was on the last day, with 3 exceptions. We mend what time breaks, we add nothing of our own. And we keep 1 workshop on every continent lit and stocked, because the promise isn't that this world stays a picture. The promise is that it stays ready. Ready for what? Kessa asked. For the day an Ophim Keel asks to come home. Quist said it the way you'd report the weather. Yours is the 9th ship to reach Cessarin in 800 years, Captain. The first with an Ophim aboard in 2 centuries. We keep a list of firsts. It's short and we know it by heart, and tonight every keeper on this world is going to drink to your navigator's name. She set the shuttle down on a terrace above the 3rd quay, beside a field of stone that ran along the cliff line further than the eye could follow. And that was where the tour stopped being a tour. The roll walls of Surin stood twice Kessa's height, cut from the world's own white stone, and they went on for kilometers. Both faces of every wall were carved, edge to edge, top to bottom, in old Ophim script the size of a thumbnail. Names, millions of names, tens of millions, wall after wall after wall, each name with a single date beneath it. And between the walls grew low silver-leafed ground cover, the same plant Mara Quist wore at her collar, and the air over the whole field had the held-breath quality of a library or a church. The ones who didn't board, Quist said quietly. Cessarin's dead from the year the sky began to fail until the last hull lifted. The ones the sickness took, and the famine years, and the panic years, and the ones who were simply old and chose to stay so a younger birth could go. Every keeper learned stone-cutting first, before anything. The walls were begun by your people in the evacuation years. We finished them. We recut them as the weather wears them. We have recut some of these names 11 times. She laid the back of her hand gently, custom gently, against the stone. This is most of what keeping is, Captain Vire. People think it must be the cities. It's the names. Low walked the wall slowly, far hands folded, near hands trailing just above the carved stone like a blind woman reading, and Kessa and Pim and Doran walked behind her in silence, because there was nothing in any of their languages for the size of this. It was Pim who finally asked the question they were all carrying. He asked it in his small, cracked voice, looking up at the white stone going on and on against the green sea. What happened to the sky? Mara Quist stopped walking. She looked at the 4 of them, the smuggler crew of a mortgaged freighter from the far side of the lie, standing in the grave field of a world the galaxy had agreed never existed. And Kessa watched her make the same judgment Asher Reyes had made in the harbor kitchen, the judgment this whole road existed to make gently. They're ready, or as ready as anyone gets. Come up to the cantor's house, the keeper said. This part is told sitting down, with something hot in everyone's hands. We've found that matters more than you'd think. The cantor's house stood at the top of the city, a long, warm room of dark timber and worn stone that the keepers had clearly used as their own hearth for generations. The one place on Cessarin where the not-adding rule visibly relaxed, because the walls were hung with 800 years of small human clutter. Children's drawings, a cracked guitar, group portraits of keeper cohorts going back to flat photographs, 1,000 mugs no 2 alike. Quist put a kettle through its ritual and set hot cups in every pair of hands, hers last, and sat and told them, 870 years ago, all of your peoples and all of ours lived in the same part of the sky. Not this arm, the old one, deeper in, the first shore. Your species' true histories all begin there, and so does ours. We were neighbors. Strange ones, late ones. Humanity was the youngest people on the shore by 100,000 years, the rough family at the bottom of the hill. Your civilizations were old and high and beautiful. She turned her cup slowly. And then the shore's stars began to die. Not an attack, not a war. A cascade, a sickness in a chain of old suns, each failure seeding the next, slow at first, then not slow. The light went wrong, then the radiation came, then the crop failures, then the long cold. It took 60 years to cross the shore from end to end. Your scholars in the early years called it the withering. Ours called it the sear. By either name, it was the end of the world, of every world. 41 settled worlds, 60-some peoples. There was nowhere to stand and fight it, because you cannot fight weather made of stars. There was only one thing anyone could do. Leave, Doran said. Leave, Quist nodded. And here's the part you were never taught. The part the whole lane you just flew exists to carry you to. Your peoples were old and high and beautiful, and their ships were old and high and beautiful too. Fast, elegant, and fragile, built for a kind sky. The Seer's front was not a kind sky. It was a wall of radiation and dust and ruin 40 light years thick, and it ate elegant ships. She set her cup down. Ours didn't die in it. Humanity's worlds were rim worlds, poor worlds, hard-weather worlds we built ugly. Brute hulls, slow and massive, shielded like bunkers because everything where we lived wanted us dead. The shore's high peoples had spent 100 millennia politely not noticing the crude family at the bottom of the hill. The ghost of a smile, worn soft by 8 centuries of retelling. And then the sky failed, and it turned out the only keels in creation that could swim the Seer and live were the ugly ones. Ours, the room was very quiet. The kettle ticked as it cooled, domestic and enormous. So we carried you, Marquis said. All of you, everyone who could be carried. It took 66 years, and it has a name in our records that you will not find in any Accord history, the Long Carry. 2,118 human hulls, refitted from freighters and ore haulers and grain ships, running the wall of the Seer again and again and again, out with 11,000 souls aboard, back empty, out again. 11 billion before it ended. 11 billion people of 62 peoples carried across 40 light years of dying sky to a new arm, this one, the one your Accord now calls home and swears it evolved in. She looked up and her eyes were dry, and that was somehow worse than tears would have been. This grief had been kept so long it had become load-bearing. The crossing took 19 days each way through the front, hulls screaming the whole time. We lost ships. 118 of them, with all hands, full holds, and empty ones alike. There are human family lines, Captain, that lost every working adult to the carry across 3 generations and kept crewing the runs anyway, because the boards at every dock posted the same arithmetic every morning. Berths left, hulls left, years left. Everyone could read it. Nobody who could fit in a berth was left behind, except the ones the walls outside are for, the ones time took before their hull came. She rose, went to the long room's seaward window, and pushed the shutters open on the grave field falling away below, white stone rolling to the cliff line, silver ground cover stirring, the kept city shining beyond it under its borrowed light. 62 peoples got out of the shore alive. You're 4 of them. You've been 4 of them this whole time. In the school where they taught you to fear us. On the dock where you signed your articles. In your bunks 4 nights ago on the wrong side of a line your own ancestors crossed in our holds. She turned back to them. That's what happened to the sky. Now drink what's in your hands, all of you, slowly. The next part is harder. Harder, Kessa heard herself say. The dead sky is the easy part. The dead sky is weather, said Marquis. The next part is what people did about it. The next part is why there's a line. She told it plainly the way the walls outside were plain, and Kessa understood as she listened that this plainness was itself the product of centuries. Every dramatic word sanded off by 800 years, of keepers learning what survivors of a lie could bear to hear. The carry ended. 62 peoples stood in a new arm of the sky. On good worlds our survey ships had found and charted, and in some cases seeded for you, and for a generation it was what you would hope. There are recordings in the Anchorage archive of the Gratitude festivals, whole cities of 6 species dancing in the same square. Your peoples and mine grieved the shore together and built together, and the human yards in the new arm taught anyone who asked, and for 50 years the word human in 62 languages meant what it had meant on the rescue boards, the ones who come back. And then the children grew up, Doran said. He said it without bitterness, an old man reading an old pattern. Quist nodded. The children grew up, and the children's children. And they grew up inside a fact their parents had been too busy surviving to feel the weight of everything they had, their worlds, their air, the orbits their cities sat in. Every atom of it was a gift from one family, the youngest and crudest family on the old shore, who had carried them like cargo while their own elegant fleets burned in the Seer behind them. Gratitude is warm for a season, Captain. Owedness is cold forever. There were 62 proud old peoples in that arm, every one of them 100,000 years deep in their own glory, and now their whole story funneled through 19 days in a human hold. She spread her hands flat on the table, an old gesture, a keeper's gesture. Kessa would learn later it meant now the heavy part. A movement rose. It called itself many things on many worlds, but the name that stuck translates as the unowned. Its argument was simple and it was not stupid. A people cannot stand upright under a debt that size. A child who knows everything was given cannot ever fully believe they built anything. The unknown said, our children deserve a story they can grow in. A story where we cross the dark ourselves. A story where we owe no one. A story where you don't exist, Lo said softly. A story where we are weather, Quist agreed. Worse than not existing, they kept us, but they turned us. The founders of what became your accord met in convocation, all 62 delegations, 11 years of argument. We have the minutes. You'll be offered them at the anchorage. Some of the speeches in defense of the truth are the finest things anyone of any species ever said, and they lost. The vote carried 62-0 on the final reading, because in the end even the truth's defenders looked at their grandchildren and flinched. They drafted what their own documents call the severance. 1. The new arms histories would be refounded, each people autochthonous, self-arisen, ancient in its current soil. 2. The archives of the shore and the carry would be sealed or burned. You have all noticed, I think, that every species in the Accord has a founder's fire in its past, a tragic archive loss always in the same 40-year window. That window is the severance doing its work. 3. The old arm, the shore, the graves, and every human world, because we would not give up our dead or yours, would be charted as one volume, interdicted and storied as a horror. And 4. The locks. Every navigation corps the Accord would ever license would carry the denial you met 4 nights ago, so that any keel that found the truth could never carry it home as anything but a sealed and discredited witness. Quist looked up. They came to us with it. 62 delegations to the people who had carried them, with the document asking us to become the monster under the galaxy's bed. And they were honest. I'll give the founders that. They stood in our oldest hall and were honest. Their chief delegate was an Opham, as it happens. Her words are carved at the anchorage in the room where you'll stand when your nav core is freed, so I won't spoil their weight. But what they amount to is your kindness is a sun our children cannot grow under. Let them have the shade. We are begging the people we owe everything for one thing more. Our own story back, even though it has to be a lie, and the price of the lie is your name. The room was silent. Outside, far below, the sea of Cessarin moved against the quays of an empty-kept city, patient as everything else on this road. And humanity said yes, Kessa said. It wasn't a question. The lane, the pantry, the soup, the stiles. She had been traveling through the answer for 9 days. Humanity argued for 6 years and then said yes, Quist said. We were not saints about it. There are whole archives of the fight, and you should read them someday. We nearly broke ourselves over it. The yes that finally carried our own vote was built on this. We had not carried 11 billion people out of the dark in order to own them. A rescue you must spend the rest of history thanking someone for is just a finer kind of cage, and we had seen enough cages in the seer. If our name was the last thing the shore's peoples needed carried away from them so they could stand up straight in their new sky, she shrugged. And the shrug had 2,118 hulls in it. Then we were already the people who carried things. But we set conditions, and the severance is signed in both directions, and the conditions are why everything you've seen since Style 14 exists. We keep the old worlds, all of them, yours and ours, ready forever. That's the first condition, you're sitting in it. We keep the first manifest, every name carried, every name lost, every name on every wall on every world, complete and uncensored, that's the second. The lane stays lit and the door stays open from your side, always, no matter what story is told about us, so that the truth is never locked, only unfashionable. That's the third. And the fourth, and here Mara Quist looked directly at Kessa Viri, and Kessa felt the look land like a hand on the shoulder, like a harness fitted to hard points, like being taken under tow. The fourth is called the right of asking, and it is the reason, Captain, that your particular ship, with your particular debts, is going to matter very much at the table. But that's for the anchorage to lay out properly. Tonight is for something older than rights. She stood and gathered the cups, and her plainness opened for a moment into something with 8 centuries of patience burning quietly inside it. Tonight your navigator goes to the rolls, and we find her family. That is always the first thing. That is the thing all of this is for. The boarding rolls of Cessarin were kept at the 3rd quay, in the long stone customs hall where the evacuation itself had been run, and they were not carved but written, ledger after ledger in tall oak racks. 11 years of departures inked by hand at this very counter while the sky outside went slowly wrong. Mara Quist walked the racks like a woman walking her own childhood, pulled the volume for the southern shore in the 41st year of the carry, and laid it open under the lamp with the reverence of liturgy. Sen, she said, Quay Singers Guild, Southern Shore. Here. The page held 12 names in a careful Opham clerk's hand. Beside the 8th name, Asili Sen, aged 4 years, daughter of the Quay singer Maru Sen, where a signature should have been, there was a small inked handprint. 4 fingers spread wide, pressed down 800 years ago by a child too young to write. On the day she was carried out of the world in an iron ship by strangers, while her city sang her family's own departure song from the seawall because the Quay singers were leaving and someone had to sing them out. Boarding custom, Quist said softly. The little ones pressed a hand, so that there would be proof, you understand, that they had been. That they were real, that they went, that someone took them aboard and wrote them down. Hull was the Iron Lark, run 902. She made the crossing in 21 days, bad weather in the front that month. Esili Sen disembarked alive at the New Arm on the 3rd of harvest month, and her line continues. The keeper looked up. It continues to you, navigator. We cross-matched your family register from your harbor filing at halfway. You are her line, 8th descent. This is your grandmother's grandmother's hand. Lo Sen touched the small printed hand with one finger of each of her 4, and then the stillness that her people kept where other species kept their weeping finally failed her, and she made a sound Kessa had heard only once before at a funeral on a dock in the rain. The thin rising keen of an Opham whose grief has become too large for ceremony, except it kept changing key as it rose because it could not decide what it was, because there was no word in any of their languages for this either. Grief and homecoming and rage at the theft of it and gratitude for the keeping of it, all in one note, in a stone hall where her people's names had waited 8 centuries for someone to come be wrecked by them. And her crew wept with her, each in the grammar of their kind. Pym shed in a soft pale fall, both arms around Lo's waist. Doran Hask stood at engineer's rest, hands folded, and let the water run out of his good eye and his blind one alike, unashamed, the way the very old weep who have decided tears are just honesty with the pressure taken off. And Kessa Veer, a captain, who had not cried since the spindle took her father's license and her family's name in the same afternoon. Kessa felt her second eyelids close and her sight blur hot, and she let it happen, standing in the records of the rescue of everyone she had ever loved, because that was the size of it. That was the thing the legend had been built to keep her from standing in. Every soul she knew, Brell at her yard bench on Meridian Shoal, the dock gangs, the Spindle's own enforcers, every teacher who had ever pointed at the amber line and said never, every one of them was descended from a name in a hall like this, written down in human ink by lamplight while the stars died, carried in a screaming iron hold by a family of strangers who then, when asked, gave away their own good names so that the carried could feel tall. The quarantine protected no one from humanity it never had. It protected the story the rescued told their children from the dead who could disprove it. The line on every chart of her life was the wall of a nursery, and the monsters painted on it were the ones who had built the nursery and paid for it and kept the lamp lit in the hall outside for 800 years in case any child ever woke and came looking for the truth. Dread had no purchase left. What stood in Kessa Vera now in the customs hall of Cessarin was awe, and awe, she discovered, was heavier. Dread you could run from. Awi asked you what you were going to do about it. They stayed 2 days on Cessarin, and the world worked on them the way the keepers, who had hosted 8 shiploads of the shattered in 800 years, knew it would. Pym found the no-roll book. The Lascars had been the shore's smallest people, indentured even there, half of them unregistered, and at the boarding counters, when families with no papers reached the head of the line, the human clerks had not turned one of them away. They had opened a separate ledger and written them in by witness, name given aloud, species no line known, vouched by the clerk's own signature. 40,000 Lascars entered the New Arm with a human's name standing surety beside theirs, and the Lascar registry tradition, the foundling rolls that had caught Pym himself on a dock at 6, descended from that ledger. The boy read the page Quist found him, the one where his own surname first appeared, given aloud by a no-roll molting child to a clerk named only as Tia Barra, who had signed surety for 200 strangers, and then, the marginal note said, gone back out into the boarding crush to find more. Pym didn't cry that time. He copied the clerk's signature onto the inside of his own wrist with a marker, carefully like a treaty with himself, and Kessa pretended not to see, and the keepers pretended not to see, and everyone saw. Doran found the workshop on the southern continent, the one kept lit, and spent a day with the keeper masons retruing a preservation field mount that had drifted out of tolerance, and came back to the ship that evening older and lighter, as if he'd set down a tool he'd been carrying his whole life without a job to use it on. And Lo found the human graves. They were at the cliff's end past the last roll wall, a small plot, 206 names, carry crews and keepers who had died on or above. Cessarin across 8 centuries buried facing the sea because that was how the Opham buried their own honored dead. The headstones were human plain, but into the top of each one some Opham hand, 800 years of different Opham hands, the carving style said, witnesses and returners across the centuries, had cut the Quaysinger's honor knot, the mark reserved for those who die at sea bringing a crew home. Lo stood before them a long time. Then she sang the third progression over them, the children's verse, the road home, and from the watch house at the field's edge, quietly a young human cantor sang the harmony line because of course the keepers had learned it. They had been singing her people's songs to the road markers for 800 years, so the road would never go silent. That night, on the terrace above the lit and empty city, Lo found Kessa at the rail. "You're going on to the anchorage," Lo said. "And then you're going back across. I've watched you decide it for 2 days." "Brel," Kessa said simply, "the debt." And she gestured at the world. "The rolls, the silver light falling patient on stone, everything, and this. They can't seal it forever. Somebody has to carry it home who can't be filed away. I don't know yet why that's me, but the keeper does. I can feel it. You're not coming." It wasn't an accusation. It was a captain doing inventory. "My grandmothers walked a road for 800 years to put me at the foot of this terrace." Lo's far hands were unfolded, loose at rest in a way Kessa had never seen them. "The cantors have asked me to stay a season and teach them the living drift of the progressions. The songs have kept moving. Out in the accord, the keepers want the changes. Imagine that. They kept our songs 8 centuries, and now they want to learn what our exile did to the music." She made the small chiming sound that was Afam laughter wet at the edges. "A season. Then I'll come back across and dig the before verses out of every temple archive on 4 worlds, and I will put my people's true sky back into their mouths. And no censor in the accord can stop it, because you cannot seal a hymn, Kessa. People sing them at weddings." She turned from the rail. "That's my run. Yours is at the table. Go get our way home unlocked, Captain. Then come back through and tell me what it cost." The thin margin lifted from Cessarin anchorage the next morning. 3 crew aboard where 5 had signed articles, and a whole world singing 1 navigator down to the quay. The lane to the anchorage ran 4 days inward from the cradle shelf, and the deeper it ran, the older the kept things beside it became. Worlds and worlds and worlds, each one lit, each one ready, 62 homecomings standing by in the dark with the patience of stone. Until at last, on the 4th day, the road rose over a final shoal of golden suns, and Earth came up on the forward screen. No chart in the accord carried its true position. No story in the accord carried its true face. Kessa had grown up on the versions, the cinder, the glass tomb, the pit at the center of the forbidden dark where the human fire had finally turned on itself. What turned below the thin margin's bow, small and blue at the bottom of its old yellow sun's long fall of light, was a world with scars and a world that was alive, and it took Lo's absent voice in Kessa's memory, and the Keeper's history, to read the scars rightly. One whole hemisphere wore the seer's signature, continents of pale regrown green laid over old burnlands, the specific stubborn green of things replanted by hand, generation after generation, into ground that had been told to die and declined. "They caught the edge of it," Doran said quietly at her shoulder. "The front." The Keeper said their worlds were rim worlds, rim of the shore, nearest the failing suns. They were carrying everyone else out through weather that was eating their own home behind them. He let out a slow breath, and when it was done, they went back. To this. Politest thing the Severance ever did for them was call this place a tomb, because what it actually is, the old engineer searched for it, is a field they replanted for 800 years while the people they saved told campfire stories about their teeth. And around Earth in high patient orbits like a second ring system hung the carry, 2,000 hulls. Kessa counted the first 100 and stopped, because the count was doing something to her chest. They were exactly what Mara Quist had said they were: ore haulers, grain ships, freighters, brutes. Each one the size of a small moon's worth of stubbornness, their hulls still wearing the scour of the seer's front like a tradesman's hands. Not mothballed, kept. Running lights burning in the old courteous white, berths lit. Holds. She put the optics on one and her breath went. Holds open and clean and fitted with fresh acceleration cradles in 62 anatomies, the way the way station pantry had been stocked. Just in case. The most feared armada in galactic legend, the fleet whose shadow had justified 8 centuries of locks and lines and lessons, hung over its half-healed world in plain sight, unarmed and unaimed, doors open made of rescue from keel to crown, and ready to do it all again tomorrow if any sky anywhere failed. The legend had promised her a fortress at the heart of the dark. The dark's heart was a fire station. Thin margin said approach control, warm, human, live. Anchorage, welcome in. Slips lit for you and Captain Vire, be advised, word came down the lane ahead of you. The table convenes for your asking at tomorrow's first bell. Tonight there's a thing that's older and matters more, if the youngest of your crew is willing. A pause, gentle. The book's open, son. It's been open since Cessarin called ahead. Page is already ruled. The anchorage was the largest built thing any of them had ever seen, and the humans had grown gardens up its sides. That was the anchorage in one image, Kessa decided, a station the size of a moon, 800 years old, the administrative heart of the most consequential secret in the galaxy, with bean trellises in the arboretum ring and children's bicycles leaned against a stanchion older than the Accord. The keepers of the legend did not live like wardens. They lived like a lighthouse family, enormous and unhurried, halfway up a dark stair the rest of creation pretended wasn't there. That evening, In a records hall whose racks ran away into a soft-lit distance like the naves of some patient cathedral, a registrar with ink-stained fingers opened the no-roll book, the original, the Carey's own. Its first page is 800 years old and its latest page dated this morning, and Pim of No Line, foundling of the Meridian Docks, gave his name aloud to a human clerk, and the clerk wrote it and signed surety beside it in the manner of T. Ibarra. And the boy stopped being no-roll in the oldest open registry in the galaxy. He signed beneath, in careful Lasker script that he had to be shown where to put. He was very still all the way through it, the new stillness, the kind that holds. Why does it matter so much? Kessa asked the registrar afterward, quietly, while Pim stood looking at his own page like a man looking at a sunrise. He has papers in the Accord. I signed for him years ago. Papers say someone is responsible for him, the registrar said. This book says he happened, that he is a fact in the universe that someone wrote down and answered for, unconditionally, forever. We learned in the boarding crush what it does to people, having no proof they happened. She closed the book with the softness of liturgy. Hold on to that distinction tomorrow, Captain. The table runs on it. Your whole errand, when you boil it down, is 11 billion people whose proof we kept while their own registries were burned. The table convened at first bell, and it was a table. Kessa had braced through a sleepless night for a throne room, a tribunal, the marble machinery of a great power. What waited at the summit of the anchorage was a long, worn wooden table in a room walled in glass, with Earth and the Carey turning slowly outside, and 9 humans around it with work in front of them and tea going cold. The eldest of them, a broad gray woman introduced simply as Speaker Noor, waved the Margin's crew into chairs as if they were neighbors come about a fence. On the wall behind her, in deep-cut old Offham, above a line of trade script translation, ran the words Mara Quist had refused to spoil, the words of the Offham chief delegate. 800 years ago, on the day 62 peoples asked humanity to become a monster. We are asking the light to call itself darkness, so our children can believe they grew tall alone. We know what we ask. We will owe you this too, and it will never be paid, and that is why we ask it, because you are the only people in the sky who will carry even this. Sit, said Speaker Noor. You've had the history. The keepers tell me you stood up under it better than most, which the keepers do not say lightly. So let's do the work. You came down the lane for a key, Captain Vire. Here is everything the key means, plainly, because plainness is the only mercy this room has ever had to offer. The right of asking is the 4th condition of the severance. Any soul of the carried peoples who crosses the line and asks for the truth must receive all of it. Done. You have it. And if that soul then chooses to carry the truth home, the Accord is bound by its own founding instrument to admit the bearer, unlock the keel, and hear the asking read into record. The unlock is real. We hold the treaty keys in trust. Your core will be freed before you leave this room, whatever you decide. But understand what the road home has done to everyone before you. She slid a thin folder across the table. 39 entries, 800 years. Every witness who ever carried the asking back. The 1100 of the Vale Flotilla are 1 entry. They sealed those in a season. The Accord has never once broken the treaty's letter, Captain. They admit the bearer every time. They unlock nothing else. The bearer is met at the line by the Bureau of Transit Hygiene, quarantined as a contaminated vector, examined, deposed in closed session, heard into record, you see, a sealed record, discredited as disordered by transit trauma, and released into a life where every word they say about the far side of the line is pre-refuted by their own medical file. The right has never failed. Noor's voice didn't change, which was how Kessa knew how old this grief was. It has been smothered 39 times. The clause binds them to hear the asking into record. In 800 years, no witness has ever found a record the Accord could not seal. Silence. Earth turned in the glass. Somewhere down the table, one of the 9 turned a page and made a note because the work of keeping does not stop for despair. That was its own quiet lesson. So the choice we put to you is the one we put to everyone, with no thumb on the scale, Noor said. Stay and be welcome forever. Most stay, and they live good lives, and no one here will ever call it surrender, or carry the asking, knowing the machine that waits. You have a sister under a debt, I'm told, which the wages will answer either way. Kessa's head came up. Noor slid a second document across. Unbothered, carrier's wages. You crossed the line with souls aboard, and you're about to carry the heaviest cargo we have. The Carey has paid its crew since the first run. The fund has compounded for 800 years. And the trustees ruled this morning that your articles qualify. It clears in any dock in the Accord. It would clear your spindle 300 times over. So the debt is off the table either way. That's deliberate. We will not let money make this choice for you. The choice is only this: a good life inside the truth or a hard run carrying it out. Take your time. The room is patient. And Kesaviri, 26 4 years a captain, smuggler out of Meridian Shoal, daughter of a man whose name a syndicate had eaten, sat in the patient room with 800 years of smothered askings in a thin folder in front of her, and did the thing she had been raised and trained and shaped her entire crooked life to do. She read the manifest like a smuggler. "You've been running it through the front door," she said slowly. 39 times, the asking goes home as testimony, a witness, a deposition, a tribunal. Politics, history. And history walks in through the one gate the Accord built specifically to search. She looked up from the folder. "You misdeclared the cargo." One of the 9 put down her pen. Speaker Noor's eyes did something at the corners. "Go on." "I move freight past people whose whole job is stopping me, and the first law of the trade is, the gate reads the label, not the load. You have been labeling this truth as what it means, the history of the galaxy, the crime of the founders, the debt to humanity. Of course they seal it. It's addressed to the part of the Accord whose job is sealing. But that's not what the cargo is. I've walked your road. Style 14 to the pantry to halfway to the rolls of Secherin to that ledger downstairs with my boy's name in it, and not once did this road ever hand me history." Her voice was gathering now, the way it did on a run when the line of the thing finally showed itself clean. "It handed me a repaired anchor, chalk salts, soup, a child's handprint, 206 headstones with my navigator's honor knot on them. Names, Speaker. The whole road is names. And there is one institution in the Accord older than the severance, one registry the founders did not dare burn or lock, because it's the one thing 62 proud peoples would never let anyone touch, not even to save their own lie." She laid her slate-gray hand flat on the table, her father's gesture, the closing of a deal, the kin rolls, the ancestor registries, the Temple of Linesons on Meridian Shoal and its siblings on every founded world. Accord deep law older than the Accord. A descent roll deposition presented by a registered descendant must be entered, must be cried in the registry hall, and can never be sealed, because sealing a kin roll is desecration. They couldn't close that door when they drafted the severance, because closing it would have meant telling 62 priesthoods why. Kesavira looked around the table at the 9 keepers of the galaxy's debt. "So stop sending witnesses. Don't address it to their courts. Address it to their grandmothers. I'm not going home as testimony. I'm going home as genealogy, certified copies, descent matched, species by species, the boarding rolls for the Temple of Lines, the no-roll book for the Foundling Docs, the roll walls for the wall on Peller that's missing the truth under every name. Let the Bureau meet me at the line. Let them quarantine me, depose me, seal my mouth forever. The cargo doesn't need my mouth." She sat back. "You can't discredit a handprint. It's not an argument. It's an ancestor." The table was quiet for a long moment. Earth turned. The carry burned its courteous lights across the glass. 800 years, said Speaker Noor at last, to the room, to the 9, to the carved ophim words on the wall. And there was something rising under her plainness, like the sun coming up under fog. "We have waited for the asking to come back down the lane in the hands of a professional." She stood, and the 9 stood with her. "Captain Vire, the table finds the asking well-formed. Registrars will work the night. You'll lift its second bell with certified descent match rolls for the Drev, the Ophim, the Lasker, and the Vethic. Sealed in treaty wrappers the Bureau is bound to pass. Your core will be free before you reach your slip." She put out her hand, palm up, the old custom, and this time Kessa knew it and met it. 39 witnesses walked out of this room as brave people going to be silenced. And we let them go, because the right was all we had. You're the first one leaving with the root. The table would be obliged. And here, the speaker of the Keepers of the Legend smiled. Finally, like a dockhand, like a tender pilot, like someone making room. "If you do us the honor of smuggling 11 billion people home." The registrars worked the night, and the anchorage worked with them. Kessa stood in the loading bay at second bell and watched the cargo come aboard her battered freighter with more ceremony than the thin margin had, received in her whole graceless working life. Case after sealed case, in pale treaty wrappers, each one stenciled in 2 scripts, each one walked up the ramp by a keeper who handed it over the threshold like a sleeping child. The Drev rolls, descent matched to 400 living Peller lines, Yent Caro's first among them by his own dockside request, relayed down the lane from halfway. The Ophim rolls, with a certified facsimile of 1 page from the Southern Shore ledger that Kessa had asked for by name. The Lasker no-roll book, complete, every witness signature carried forward. The Vethic rolls, her own people, which she had not been able to bring herself to open on the anchorage, because a captain on the eve of a run does not hold her own hull. And somewhere in those wrappers was a name that would be her father's, 8 generations up, written down in human ink by someone who had answered for him. When the last case was secured, the nav core chimed. Kessa was strapping in. The sound went through her like a struck anchor. "Route computation restored," the screen said. "Asking in transit under treaty seal." And then in smaller script in the manner of the road, 14 words that she would keep folded in the captain's book for the rest of her life. This unit's denial is withdrawn with apology. It was never ours to give. Safe home. The run back up the lane took 11 days, and the road saw them off the way it had taken them in. The cradle's golden sun slid by to starboard. Cessarin's beacon sang the third progression after them for a full light hour. A world saying goodbye in Lo's grandmother's voice. At halfway reach, they docked 6 hours for water and were fed twice, once at the harbor kitchen, once at the Caro table, where Yenton Harbor Braid pressed a wrapped parcel of hill country salt bread on each of them, gripped Kessa's arm, and said only in the supper table dialect, "Mind the cargo and come back hungry." Asha Reyes rode out with them to the edge of her sections and peeled away with a wing waggle, and a tender topped them off at the junction without being asked, and the painted hulls on its boom had gained one small new silhouette that looked very much like a certain mortgaged freighter. And then Style 14 stood up out of the dark ahead, mile-long and patient, with the amber legal line of the demarcation glowing beyond it across the plot like a dawn she was no longer afraid of, and beyond that, waiting exactly where the treaty said it would be waiting the accord. Cutter on intercept, Doran called from his board. Mild as a man reporting rain. Transponder reads Bureau of Transit Hygiene, clean premise, a beat. They've had 800 years to think about that name and they kept it. Thin margin, said Style 14, soft on the old open band, as the line came up to meet her bow. Your lane is swept and your cargo is logged. Whatever happens on the far side of this crossing, it is on the record here that you went, and what you carried, and why. The voice of the watch, courteous as the first morning, hollowed step gentle. That record does not seal. Good crossing, Captain. Knock the dust off the road for us. They crossed the demarcation at 034 ship's time, 11 days and 1 lifetime after crossing it the other way in their sleep, and the clean premise took them under guns that the road behind them had made look very small and very young. What followed was 4 days of the machine, and Kessa Vera submitted to every turn of it with the serenity of a professional watching a gate, read a label. They were boarded by suited inspectors who moved through the margin like men expecting plague and found salt bread. They were quarantined, sampled, scanned, and interviewed separately and together by a bureau examiner with kind exhausted eyes who explained, in the tones of a man who genuinely believed it, that transit beyond the line was known to produce vivid confabulated memory structures and that everything they thought they had seen would be respectfully recorded in their file. Kessa agreed to all of it. She signed the depositions. She watched her own testimony, Style 14, the pantry, Cessarin, the table, the truth entire, vanish into a sealed annex with a case number, the 40th asking smothered in 800 years, and she signed the seal itself without a tremor, because none of that was the cargo. Then the examiner reached the hold manifest, and the machine met itself coming the other way. Cases sealed 206, he read, declared as, he stopped, read it again, looked up, religious registry material, kin roll depositions, descent matched, presented for entry by registered descendants. His exhausted eyes went, for the first time, fully awake. You're declaring genealogy. I'm declaring family records, Kessa said. Addressed to the Temple of Lines on Meridian Shoal, presented by myself, descent registered Vethic, and by Pim of the Foundling Rolls, descent registered Lasker under registry law. Check the wrappers, examiner, then check your own statutes. We'll wait. We're good at it now. He checked. They watched him check. They watched him take it up 2 levels of command, and they watched the Bureau's own adjudication system, Accord Firmware, Foundry Original, sister to the lock that had exiled them, return its finding in plain block script on the examiner's slate, and Kessa read it upside down through the quarantine glass because that was faster than waiting to be told, and her second eyelid stung because the Accord's machines, it turned out, had been waiting 800 years for somebody to file the truth under its real name. Classification. Kinroll deposition. Registry law antecedes transit statutes. Seizure not authorized. Sealing not authorized. The line must be cried. The machine that had locked the door let the names walk in through it, because the founders, in all their careful severing, had never dared teach their own deep law to lie. That the thin margin came down the approach to Meridian Shoal under Bureau escort on a gray harbor morning, and the word had run ahead of her, because words like this always do. Whatever else the Bureau sealed, it could not seal the dock gangs who had watched a freighter come back across the amber line with registry wardens waiting for her at the quay. Half the shoal was at the Temple District by noon. The Spindles collectors were at the foot of the gangway first, they would be, and Kesaviri paid out 62,000 standards in treaty, cleared carriers' wages into their slates without a word, plus the 4 years' interest, plus, because her father had taught her that a closed account should close loudly, 1 standard extra for the audit fee, receipt demanded and witnessed. Then she walked past them, with her crew and 206 cases, to find her sister. Braille met her in the crowd at the temple steps, 22, yard-grimed, furious, alive, shaking her by both shoulders and demanding to know in front of 4 registry wardens whether Kessa had any idea what the harbor had been saying about her for a month. And Kesavir held her sister on the steps of the Temple of Lines debt-free, both of them, for the first time in either of their lives, and said the only thing in all the world's languages that fit: "I have to tell you where we're from." The Temple of Lines had stood on Meridian Shoal for 600 years, and its registrar major was an old Drev priestess named Solveth, who had cried 10,000 lines into the record and thought her office held no surprises. She received the deposition at the high counter as the law required, opened the first treaty raver with the temple's own blade as the law required. And then she stood for a long time over the certified facsimile that lay on top of the ophim rolls, where the registrars of the anchorage had placed it deliberately, the way you place a lamp where the stairs begin. A page of a boarding ledger, 800 years old. 12 names in a careful clerk's hand, and beside the 8th name, small and inked and spread wide for proof, the handprint of Eseli Sen, aged 4 years, carried out of a dying sky by strangers and written down so that there would never be a day in all rest of time when no one could prove she happened. "Register," Kessa said quietly, into the silence of the high counter. "The line must be cried." And Soulveth, priestess of the one law the founders had not dared to burn, looked from the handprint to the smuggler captain and back, and made her ruling in the form the temple had used for 6 centuries in a voice that cracked exactly once on the first word. "The line is true. The line is entered." She turned to her wardens, and her old plated hands were trembling, and her voice rose into the registry hall the way temple voices had risen over kin rolls since before the accord had a name, and it carried out the open doors to where half of Meridian Shoal stood waiting in the gray morning. "Send to every temple on every founded world. The shoal has received lines. 40,000 lines of the Veil Flotilla, found living. 11 billion lines of the first shore, found written." The crack again, she let it stand. "Light the crying lamps, wake the cantors. We are going to be reading names for years." They were reading names for years. That was the thing nobody on either side of the line had predicted. Not the bureau, not the table, not Kessa herself. The truth did not detonate. It dissolved. There was no single day the Accord story fell. There was instead a season, then a year, then a decade of supper tables. The temples cried the lines as the law required, hall by hall, world by world, and the crying lamps burned in registry windows from the shoal to the core. And families came, first the curious, then the skeptical, arriving specifically to scoff, then everyone. And they stood in the halls while cantors read the rolls aloud. And at some point in every reading, some name would land on some listener like a hand on the shoulder. A great-grandmother's name, known only from an oral line. A clan name from a grief tale. A Quay Singers Guild that a family's wedding song still mentioned without anyone remembering why. The Bureau could seal a witness. It could not seal 60,000 simultaneous moments of a stranger going very still in a registry hall, hearing an ancestor prove themselves real in human ink. The Accord did what large old things do. It denied, then it deliberated, then it survived itself. There were furious sessions and commissions of inquiry. There were 3 governments that fell and a generation of historians who had to be retrained. There was a faction that insisted to its dying day that the rolls were the longest forgery in history, and it dwindled exactly as fast as its members' own grandchildren came home from the temples with their lines in their hands. Within 2 years, some unsung clerk in the permits office, and Kessa always maintained that clerks, not captains, are the real smugglers of civilization, discovered that no statute prevented the issuance of travel documents for ancestral visitation, and the first pilgrim hulls began filing for the line. The Bureau of Transit Hygiene shrank, was renamed, and ended its institutional life as 6 people processing crossing manifests, which Doran Hass called the happiest demotion in galactic history. And the founder's own instrument, in the end, was what carried the truth the last mile. Because the severance had been signed in both directions, and once the kin rolls had made the secret unkeepable, the anchorage quietly released the convocation minutes, 11 years of them, the speeches of the 62 delegations, the defense of the truth and its defeat, and the carved words of the Ophim chief delegate, which crossed the Accord's networks in a single season and did what no warship in any legend had ever done to the galaxy. It made the whole sky sit down at once. The peoples of the Accord read their own great-grandparents begging the light to call itself darkness, and read humanity's answering vote, and understood all together in the privacy of 62 billion separate hearts what had been kept on their behalf and what it had cost the keepers, and that was the day the legend of forbidden human space actually ended. Not when the truth came out, When the shame did and was met and the meeting held, Peller raised its second wall a year to the day after the shoal's first crying. They built it facing the old memorial, the same white stone, and on it they carved the Vale Flotilla's 40,000 names again, but living this time, with their descent lines running down the generations to the present, 3 centuries of harbor braid and gardens, and at the top, in old hill country Drev, the words "We were not eaten, we were fed." Yent Caro stood in the front row of witnesses at the consecration with 400 Peller cousins he hadn't had 2 years before, and wept into all 3 bowls of the funeral soup that had turned out to be a homecoming soup, and sent Kessa a recording with 1 line of commentary in the supper table dialect. The ledger balances after all, little captain. It just needed 300 years and a bigger page. Lausanne came home across the line at the head of a convoy of Offham cantors, carrying 800 years of corrected star tables and the keeper's harmonies, and did exactly what she had promised on the terrace above Cesarine of the Quays. You cannot seal a hymn. The before verses went back into the temple services with their meanings restored, and Opham children began once again learning, sounds and meaning together, the road home through the flight of 15, and at the next solstice, for the first time in 8 centuries, the third progression was sung simultaneously on Cesarine and on every Opham world in the accord, 1 song across the amber line, and the keepers and the carried held the long note together from both sides like 2 hands meeting on a hull. Peem of the rolls, now, registered and answered, went back to the foundling docks of Meridian Shoal where a captain had once signed for a molting 6-year-old and delivered the certified no-roll book to the registry there, and stayed long enough to see the dock's oldest tradition learn its own ancestry. He shipped out again with Kessa, of course. He was crew, and the signature on his wrist had become a tattoo carefully exact, Tiabara, surety. When registry clerks asked him about it, and registry clerks always asked, he gave them the answer he had built on Cesarine and polished ever since. Family, the kind that writes you down, and Kesavire went back to the line because the line was hers now, and everyone on both sides of it knew it. She was offered everything, that first roaring year. Commissions, chairs, escorts, her testimony unsealed with apologies and her face on every feed in the accord. She took none of it. She took a license instead, the first of its kind in 800 years, drafted jointly by the Table and the Accord's Transit Ministry and stamped at her own insistence in the plain manner of a working ticket. Kesavire, Master, Thin Margin, Crossing Pilot, Demarcation Lane 1. The first pilgrim convoys needed a pilot who knew the road and was owned by neither side of it, and there was exactly 1 freighter captain in the galaxy with that cargo manifest in her past, and she had spent her whole life learning the only trade the new sky needed. How to carry precious things across a line gently, both ways. Brell came aboard as apprentice engineer under Doran, who declared he would retire to the keeper masons of Cesarine just as soon as the girl stopped, over-torquing fittings, an event he predicted for some time around the heat death of the universe. The Margin herself was offered refit after refit and accepted only what Doran approved, which meant she stayed a patched, unlovely, working hull with bumpers scarred from 1,000 dockings. Though the keepers did one thing to her at the anchorage yards, unasked, that Kessa never had painted over, along her flank in small neat trade script, in the manner of a tender's boom, a single stenciled line. Carrier, by Articles of the Long Carry. Entry 2119. On a gray harbor morning 3 years after a fouled anchor changed the shape of the galaxy, the Thin Margin led the first full pilgrim convoy out from Meridian Shoal, 41 hulls, 6 species, 1,100 berths, every one of them filled, bound across the amber line for the crying halls of Halfway Reach, the roll walls of Cesarine, the no-roll book. The worlds of the first shore kept lit and ready for 800 years against exactly this arrival. Style 14 stood up out of the dark to meet them. Mile-long and patient, the first marker of the kept road, and Kessa watched the convoy's passenger feeds as the great black hull resolved in their viewports. Watched 1,100 children of the carried meet the thing their grandmothers had called a tombstone, and watched it greet them, courteous as morning in 62 languages, the way it had been waiting all those centuries to do. "Pilgrim convoy, this is the watch at Style 14, said the voice that had once apologized for waking her. Your lane is swept. Water and air are free at every way station. They always have been. The worlds of your grandmothers are lit and the rolls are open, and the kettles at Halfway went on an hour ago." A pause, exactly long enough to be polite, and then, to 1,100 souls coming home down a road, kept for them by the family of strangers, their whole civilization had been taught to fear. "Welcome to human space. We kept it for you." The convoy crossed. The amber line of the demarcation slid aft over 41 hulls and went on glowing. Behind them, because the line itself never did come off the charts, the temples of all institutions had argued for keeping it, and their reasoning was carried in every almanac in the accord beside the crossing schedules. A boundary is only a wall if you forget who drew it and why, and the galaxy was done forgetting. So the cartographers kept the amber line and changed one thing only, the annotation, which for 800 years had read interdicted, hazard, do not approach, and which now read, in the plain script of working charts, the truth the whole long road had been built to carry, kept space. The lines of all peoples are held here. Knock and be named. And the thin margin went down the swept and lighted lane at the head of the homecoming, her captain 29 years old and debt-free in every currency that had ever mattered, her holds full of pilgrims instead of contraband, and her articles entered in the oldest registry in the sky. Kesavira, who had crossed the most forbidden line in the galaxy by accident, asleep, fouled on a current the charts denied, and who had learned, checkpoint by checkpoint, name by name, that the dark her people feared was a lamp kept burning in a hall outside a nursery, and who now flew the lamplit road for living, both directions, carrying the carried home and the keeper's patience out, while behind her the styles of the demarcation stood their watch as they always had, not guarding the galaxy from what lay inside the line, but keeping for everyone, forever, the proof that they happened, and the door that was never locked, and the light to find it by.